Today's guest is Molly Milady Arbogast. She's a sports marketing expert with 30 plus years of experience on the team and property side of the business. She's negotiated and activated more than $300 million worth of sports sponsorship, including entertainment sponsorship over the course of her career. And then she pivoted. In 2016, Molly founded POV Sports Marketing as one of the only certified, woman-owned, full-service sports marketing agencies in the entire United States. She's worked in corporate sponsorship development for the Philadelphia Eagles, Lincoln Financial Field, also in Philadelphia, Learfield Sports, the WNBA, Palace Sports and Entertainment in Detroit, including the Pistons and the Detroit Vipers, as well as IMG in Latin America. Molly and her team of sports marketing experts continue to optimize sponsorships for a diverse and growing portfolio of brand and property clients, and they include, but are not limited to, Wawa, First Trust Bank, Rothman Orthopedics, Bimbo Bakeries, College Avenue, and ASM Global Venues nationwide. She resides in Wayne, Pennsylvania, a Philly suburb, with her husband and two sons. Molly, can't thank you enough for joining us today. Welcome to the Best Boss Ever podcast.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute honor to be here and to call you a friend. So thank you for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure because your wisdom, your career, what we'll learn over the next 40 or 45 minutes is going to be amazing. So thank you for that. So we start every single one of these with the exact same question. You've got a long, very successful career. So who was the best boss or bosses that you've ever had and why?
It's absolutely impossible to say just one because when you invited me weeks ago to participate in the podcast, it really took me some time to analyze why each of my bosses was so impactful on my career and development and which one was the best. Because I also feel like there are times in your life where you have a boss that is there and you are at the right moment in your career for that boss, but that boss 10 years later might not have been the right boss. As I look back at my career working at some incredible organizations, I would say that the person who impacted me the most was a gentleman named Len Komorowski. And Len was my SVP at the Philadelphia Eagles. Many of people in the sports business know him. I am honored to be SBJ, did a wonderful profile on him as he retired as the president of the Cleveland Cavaliers. And I was honored to be on his coaching tree because I truly believe that he's a leader who coaches and develops talent. And so I had the opportunity to work with Len in the early 2000s when I left the Pistons and moved to Philadelphia to help the Philadelphia Eagles sell what would become Lincoln Financial Field and all that went into that. So it's got to be Len, Lenny the Kid, as many of us call him.
Well, that guy's a legend. I mean, kudos to you, not only for having had the opportunity to work for and with him, but to be on his coaching tree, because he's one of those guys that sort of transcends a lot of things in the world of professional team sports. So good for you. Well, listen, you spent all these years in the property side of the business, selling and packaging sponsorship. And in 2016, you decide to hang your own shingle up. So we need to understand what drove you to that, what inspired you to do that in the face of a very successful and growing career on the corporate side.
Well, it's interesting. I had the privilege of selling corporate partnerships for almost 25 years across the IMG agency offering in Latin America to the Detroit Pistons. And we were selling basketball, music, because we had two outdoor amphitheaters, as well as the Detroit Vipers, the Detroit Shock. Moved on to the Eagles. As your career progresses, there's certain things you become truly passionate about in the business. And I love building marketing partnerships. Absolutely love the conceptualization to the execution and then the fulfillment. And so as I continued to sell in the business, it felt to me the natural progression to either go to the brand side and help brands make decisions or in-house at a brand or to an agency. And as you mull these things over into your late 40s and you realize, you know what, I'm going to start an agency. And I remember a couple people calling me and saying, well, is this a stopover until your next job? I said, no, I'm really, truly going to build an agency because I want to sit with brands and help them make really good decisions about sports marketing and not get emotional about it. I love sports. Anytime a young person comes to me and says, I want to work in sports, I'm a fan, tell them, go get a ticket then. Because the word sports marketing, the key word in those two words is marketing. You're a marketer first, and sports is the tool that we use, or entertainment in the case of music. And I absolutely love sitting with the brand leadership that we get to work with and helping them understand who they are as a brand when it comes to sports and entertainment. What is the best way to connect with fans, whether it's through an individual athlete, a team deal, a collection of smaller events, a league deal. There's just so many different options. And I think at times brands get a little overwhelmed. And so my mission as an agency lead is to work with brands to help them make great decisions that will have tremendous ROI. And what's ironic, to kind of bring it full circle, is a lot of that comes back to what Len taught me. And when I worked with Len, you kind of have your idea of what a sports marketer is going to be like. And then you meet Len. And Len is an absolute student of the game of sports marketing. I remember I worked with a wonderful gentleman named Steve Ryan, who's also still in the business. And, when anyone was calling on the Pennsylvania lottery, you had to drive for 2 hours without a phone. We had flip phones then, and we did not have Blackberries. You had to drive for 2 hours with Len to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania to pitch the lottery, and 2 hours back. And in that 2 hours, you better have been prepared to discuss your pipeline and where every single deal was, and understanding category landscapes, and having talked about who you've been networking with across the league to understand values. He truly taught me how to be a student of the sports marketing game, and understanding that there is no finish line. You just continue learning, you continue evolving. Being inquisitive and curious is a daily exercise, and knowledge is power. If you don't have the information that you need to make decisions, you will make poor decisions. And I think that's exactly what we do at POV Sports Marketing, is we work with brands to make data-based decisions. I say data-based, not database, but data-based decisions, so that we are allowing the numbers to guide us and not our emotions or our fandom. Because if I want to sell Wawa smoothies in Miami, I need to know that it's going to work for people in Miami. It doesn't matter if that campaign won't work for people up in North Jersey. I'm marketing to them specifically in Miami, and what resonates with people in Miami is different than what resonates with people in the Newark area. And so I think that's where we are always guiding and working with our brands on what's the right decision for the fans in this market.
So follow up a little bit, the process of advising and guiding brands and helping them clarify, for lack of a better term, their sports marketing strategies, right down to, as you just mentioned, the local execution of a marketing campaign in a market far away from the heartland, Miami from Philadelphia example. So as that process unfolds, Molly, do you and your team actually negotiate on behalf of the brand the sponsorship, or do you provide the underpinning for a brand to be smart enough, engaged enough, and understand what their primary options will be as they negotiate with a rights holder?
In my opinion, having sat on the other side of the table in the sponsorship negotiation world, it's far better to have an agency negotiate for you, because it actually creates leverage in a negotiation for a brand. Our process really begins with sitting with a brand and understanding their core objectives and goals for a specific area or state or region or country. In the case, we have certain brands that are national, but we have to make choices, because you can't market in every single market equally. It can take certainly a national approach, but that can be a pretty heavy investment. And so oftentimes we're saying, let's identify your key markets and really look to move the needles there, whether it's growing the market or really establishing and cultivating the brand in the market. So there's a ton of work that occurs on the front end before we even make a phone call to a team, so that when we contact a team on the behalf of a brand, we're ready to talk to that team about what we want, what we need, having built sponsorships for 25 years, I know how to build a sponsorship deal. I think teams enjoy working with us. We've had several teams. I know we're tough, and I'm sorry, teams, when we're negotiating, we'll be best friends after. But when we're negotiating, we know what we need. We understand the value of the assets. We understand the value within a particular league, or in the case of college, we understand that value based on the level of a team or a level of an athletic program and what it merits in terms of intent for IP, digital, radio, database marketing, signage, you name it. And so then we will go and negotiate on the brand's behalf to build the right deal, and then go back and forth with the brand to make sure that we're staying on point and staying against our core objectives for the purchasing strategy.
Right. Understand that. That makes perfect sense. Let's talk a little bit. We said at the top, you represent both rights holders, teams, leagues, stadiums, etc., or arenas, and brands. So you got buyers and sellers, right? So are you more comfortable on the buy side, which would be representing the brand and buying and packaging sponsorship, or on the sell side, guiding a venue or a team or a rights owner as to how to sell sponsorship?
Yes, let's say yes, because, and again, it's going back to when I named the agency, when you say you're going to hang out a shingle, I never wanted to put my personal name on it because I wanted the company to become far more than just Molly Arbogast's sports marketing agency. And POV is the name I went with, POV Sports Marketing, because we bring the perspective from both sides of the table. And in the end of the day, obviously, if a brand comes in and really beats up a team, that's not a positive way to start a corporate partnership relationship. As my husband says, you attract more. What's that?
Come on, you can do it. Bees and honey, right?
Sorry, I was like, there. I couldn't remember. You attract more flies with honey than vinegar, and I think there's times where we'll even say to a brand, "Listen, I know you feel very committed to this specific point, but if this partnership's going to work, we're going to have to give in a little bit." Or agree that the number isn't the issue. Let's argue for more value. My feeling, and again, going back to leadership that I've had, Mark Donovan was another amazing boss I had at the Philadelphia Eagles. It was about being collaborative, always remembering who we were working for. But there was one time Mark said to me, I called me into my office and he goes, we were talking about a specific client, and it was a company that co-opted the deal, and he was doing the math, and he said, they actually didn't make money on our deal. And I said, how do you feel about that? And I said, I'll give you 1 million many reasons. We're totally fine with that because we need to be collaborative with this brand in order for them to achieve their missions. And he said, sometimes I think you forget who you work for. And I laughed. I said, that's the best compliment I've ever had, because that brand we were talking about has been a partner at the Philadelphia Eagles now for 25 years. So it worked, because renewals are what brands want and they're what teams need. And so at times it needs to be much more collaborative, because if you're not working for the brand, those deals go away. Brands have choices. They can move money very easily. And now more than ever, there are so many places to spend money outside of sponsorship. And I think that teams always need to remember that. As an agency, we do not sell sponsorship, as you know. We advise properties on how to go to market. So it's almost like putting on my old sponsorship sales hat and saying, look, based on our study of this market, this is what your signage and all these other elements are worth. And yes, using out-of-home CPM values is a guide, but you're not the same as the sign on the billboard on the highway. You're totally different comprehensive marketing experience for a brand. And so I really love watching and working with the properties we work with to get them excited about selling and creating partnerships that are not going to be one-hit wonders. They're going to be long-term, multi-year agreements that will grow, and upsells abound in the sports marketing industry. I constantly tell people, if you have someone who believes in you and you have something new, let them know about it, because you'll be amazed how many brands will find more funding to invest in something they believe in.
Well, I think that's more than right. The common ground of any negotiated sponsorship is super important, because it has to be win-win and there has to be some compromise on both sides. But the proof is actually in the pudding. So once the contract gets signed, goes in the desk drawer, now it's all about bringing to life in the best possible way the sponsorship activation strategy, which leverages not only brand KPIs, but helps the team, league, or venue also optimize in conjunction with the brand. And you sort of said it interestingly, because if a rights holder doesn't engage with the brand in a very creative way, in a win-win way, in a almost become an in-house agency for the brand, because the brand really, for the most part, we're not talking about the Coca-Colas and the Visas of the world who have done this for 50 years and know it inside out. I don't know how many sponsorships Wawa has really done over the course of their existence, but bringing to life activation strategies in a meaningful way, is that the brand's responsibility, the rights holder's responsibility, or is that POV Sports Marketing's responsibility?
In the end, it's the brand's responsibility to charge their agency or in-house staff to develop what is the activation strategy essentially before you buy the deal. And I think that that's often very interesting. People will go into a deal and they kind of turn to the team. And I had it happen to me when I'd be sitting in the Eagles chair or the Detroit Pistons chair or the Learfield chair, that I was building the deal based on their needs analysis and the objectives that they outlined. And then I would guide them where I wanted them to go. And oftentimes, you'll be as a salesperson, you sit and you say, oftentimes people will say, well, what's your budget? Well, as a buyer, I'm never telling you my budget ever. And the brands that do, they don't really understand how it all works, because again, they don't understand sports marketing and how things can vary between asset mixes and things like that. Partnerships should be driven by objectives that are determined by the brand, the buying and activation strategy that's created by someone like POV Sports Marketing. And then it's the job of the property to work with the agency and the brand to bring that to life. But I think oftentimes certain brands will do a deal with the team, and then their feeling is, well, now it is the job of the team to execute the entire deal. And that is not true. It is the job of the team to execute what is in the contract and to go above and beyond where they can to service that partnership. However, brands have to go above and beyond and set aside incremental activation funds to be able to bring that partnership truly to life outside of a stadium and beyond game day, right? What is the narrative on social and digital? You certainly want to have a presence on the digital social channels for a team, but that cannot be the only place you're communicating with fans and communicating the fact that you are an official partner, you have the trademark rights. You need to go beyond so that you can really hit beyond your core target and create memorable experiences for your target consumer.
Right. Well, that's, you and I have been around this game a long time. And what you just said is in many ways, sports sponsorship 101. Amazing to me at this stage of the maturity of sports sponsorship, and we're going to get to that a little bit later in this episode, that there are still brands, perhaps newly minted brands or young brands or old brands with new marketers at the helm, whatever, that don't really understand those fundamentals of sports marketing 101. What I'm really curious to know, Molly, listen, next year, 2026, will be your 10-year anniversary. So how many staff do you have now? Are you adequately staffed for the core competency or core practice areas of POV sports marketing? Talk a little bit about the internals of POV, how many, who does what, how many whats are there, that sort of thing.
I am incredibly humbled by the folks that have chosen to work at POV, and I never take that for granted, that these are people that have tremendous backgrounds that have said, no, I want to work at POV. And I've had two people even boomerang back to me. And I remember when both of them left for different reasons. One of them really wanted they both really wanted experience on the brand side. And I remember saying to them, you're family, you're part of the POV family. And if you ever want to come home, let me know. And within a year and a half for one of them and 2 years for the next one, they both proactively reached out and said, yeah, I want to come home. And I'm proud to have them on my team today because of the fact that with POV, I started the agency in 2016. Like many, small organizations, you start in a basement or a garage or a kitchen table. And we've grown to an organization of, we're still boutique. We're 15 individuals, but we are, I would like to say, a very mighty 15 people, between very competent graphic designers to account leads, strat operations people, special event operators. When we work with There's kind of a little, I don't want to call it a new mantra, but I'm just saying we handle it. When our clients are like, well, can you do this? I said, give me 24 hours and I'll come back and say, we can handle it. We have a partner in this, or we have this capacity, or whatever it might be. And, my goal and job is always to be able to, as we're serving our clients, we're not going to other agencies and getting a 10% kickback on the back end. That's not how we operate. And some people do. They'll say, well, that brand, that other agency or alliance partner is going to mark things up so that POV can make a little more money. I get paid to save my agent money and be efficient. And, when we are working with our brands, we very much become almost an in-house extension of their marketing organizations. We've worked with Wawa for 6 years, First Trust for 8 years. I have been called a First Trust Bank employee many times where I'm like, no, I actually don't work here full time, but I feel that I do because I'm made to feel as part of their family. And as we continue to grow, I think the value of working with boutique agents is I've got people who've worked at, and I worked at a top agency in IMG. It's where I started my career. One of my best bosses was Mark McCormick. His assistant, Lori Roggenberg, gave me my first job. And I learned so much watching him interact with her and just how he communicated with people. And, he was tough, but I so respected his vision and what he was trying to do for his clients. Anyway, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but I think as you look at, large agencies versus small agencies, it's about who's going to be working on your business day in and day out and have a pulse on what's right for your business. And I think that's one thing that POV does really well for our clients is that we are small and we are nimble. And, small doesn't have to be bad, because at the end of the day, you're going to have 4 people working on your account at a big agency. At POV, the collective years of experience of the 4 people working on your account is going to be 50 plus years of experience. We work faster, we work smarter, we read contracts faster and redline, and people are like, how do you know all this stuff? And I said, I have just absorbed this information. Or Greg Coleman on my team, who's extraordinary, he's been with us 6 years. Jenna Malnicki on our team, who came from Learfield in the NBA. We've sat in the big chairs in the big offices. Now we choose to be a POV Sports Marketing, living in the parts of the country that we want to live in, taking care of parents and children and dogs and lives, but also making sure that our focus is our clients and making sure they have what they need. And we're continuing to innovate with them and sometimes push them a little bit ahead. If they might not be ready for something, we'll say, this is something you should keep in mind for the next couple of years. But, again, just a snapshot into life at POV, and started and never looked back, and love it.
Well, good for you and good for the 15 folks that work with you. I have firsthand experience in working with your agency, Molly, and I can tell anybody in the listening audience that might be searching for a sports marketing agency, you could do a lot worse than, calling Molly and her team, which sort of then leads me to, and you've, for the most part, answered it. In this world of sports marketing, where a disproportionately large number of billions of dollars are invested every single year by brands, I'm leaving media rights completely out of this discussion. Brands only are spending billions every year, and most of the brands that are spending at high levels, if you will, do have agency relationships, and in many instances, more than one agency relationship. So effectively competing against the usual suspects, right? The IMGs, the CAAs, the Octagons, the Wassermans, and probably a dozen others that have larger scale and size and coverage than you do. Is there anything in addition to what you've just said where you would focus on what makes POV unique, better, and perhaps not for all, but for some brands, a much more effective relationship than one of the bigs?
Absolutely. I think what's interesting, and I had this conversation recently, and I really learned this when I was at Learfield Sports. And I loved my time at Learfield. It was an amazing time to be at Learfield. Just before I had gone back to the Eagles the second time in that, I guess it was 26 to 2012. When you really think about it, there are not as many large national brands as you think. There's a lot of multi-regional brands and there's a lot of local brands. And when I say local brands, that might be specific to a state. And so what's interesting is when you get CMOs in these, we'll call them, it's kind of like the mid-majors of college, right? They're great brands. They're trusted brands. They don't necessarily need a global agency like some of the agencies you mentioned. We are not a global agency. And if someone or one of our clients said, I need a global solution, I can literally rattle off names of exactly who I'd call. And some of them I just saw at Super Bowl or I've had recent conversations with saying, hey, let's collaborate. Because there's times when we can be a really good partner to a bigger agency, or if they have a category conflict, they want to be able to send someone to, a trusted executive that, they want to have a long-term relationship with. They don't want to necessarily send those people to their competitors. And I'm saying send them to POV, and they know that we have the right experience and the right acumen in the business to bring it along. There are certain brands that would be too big for us, and I would recuse myself immediately from an RFP or say, you know what, we're not going to be the right fit for you. But there's others that I would say, and I think you had mentioned earlier, sometimes there's a lot of big name brands that are doing it in-house and they're doing a good job, but they don't necessarily have the line of sight to rate as well as opportunity and other things that they might want to be looking at, because working with an agency, I'm working with hundreds of teams every month across the country, whereas they might be only working with 5. And I might say to them, hey, something really interesting is going on in Charlotte. And they might say, Charlotte's not of interest to me. And I'm like, it's not about Charlotte. It's about what's going on in Charlotte. Let me tell you what's happening with this one brand. And they're like, oh, that's really interesting. So it is the insights and intelligence. Eat, sleep, and breathe sports marketing. It's what we do. And our job is to know what's going on in the market. So when you look at a brand who might be, again, a storied brand that's doing it in-house, I have had more companies that we've worked with say, I had no idea what I didn't know until I hired POV Sports Marketing. And then I was blown away by how much you all knew, or your ability to call agents and get athletes at rates that are far less, because I don't know what I should be spending with an athlete. And, we don't represent athletes, unlike some big agencies that also have a talent firm where they might be sending athletes down the hall. That's a thing. I remember being at IMG at the ripe old age of 23. And I said to a guy named Peter Smith, who worked in TWI, I said, so Peter, I just have a question. So we represent American Express and we represent Wimbledon, and we sell Wimbledon to American Express. Is there a conflict? And he said, go back to your office. And he was great. I love Peter. He had a British accent and you laugh. I was like, okay, I won't ask that question again, because it is hard to remain objective at times when you're on both sides, whether it's athlete representation, event, or rights representation and brand representation. And so I've purposefully chosen the track that we are going to be a brand consulting firm so that we can be objective. And I'll go as far as saying one of our clients once, they were looking to do a deal, and they said, well, we need to drop the cost. We should pull this out. And I said, I'm going to tell you then, don't do this deal. And they said, really? I said, yeah. And they said, but that means we don't need your agency anymore. And I'm like, okay, but I'm going to sleep at night well, knowing that I gave my client advice that was the right advice just so that I can get a little retainer. That's not right. And I think that's not ethical. Again, I think that there are times where a large global agency is the absolute 1000% right track. But I would encourage brands to consider the boutique agencies. And there are a few of us out here that have been doing great work. And oftentimes they are people who left large agencies. And I'm literally thinking of 3 in my mind right now. People who left large agency to go out on their own, and they do great work. So it's in your best interest to do diligence to see what the boutiques can do for you and give them the opportunity.
No, I think that's 100% accurate. That's good guidance, because at the end of the day, it's about the quality of the work, the understanding of the marketplace, the experience that, comes in the door on behalf of a client or a client remit or an RFP or whatever the creative brief might be. And there are lots of ways to skin the cat, so to speak. And in many instances, I think a combination, perhaps boutique in one area, larger agency in others, serves brands well. And I'm not necessarily an advocate for multiple agencies in a brand portfolio, but we both know that exists, and we both know
yes,
that
it does.
In many instances, it's how effective the working relationship POV has with larger or other agencies that brings the best work to light on behalf of the brand, and the brand wins. It's pretty
Absolutely.
simple.
Well, and I think, once that partnership is done, then you get into the nuts and bolts of activation and bringing that to life. And now you are naturally working with content creation agencies and athlete representation agencies to sign athletes, to create content, special events, whatnot. And I think that, you have to be able to work with an agency that can take you from conceptualizing the why a partnership would make sense to the end game with the recap and the KPIs to say, this is some of the best money we've spent all year. And if
Right.
you can't deliver that process from conceptualization to full execution and reporting, then you're not doing your job, in my mind, as an agency, because it's not just about a negotiation. It's not just about the activation. It's about all of it and doing it well.
Right. So as we sit here today in early 2025, look in the rearview mirror a little bit. We've all went through the COVID experience, and it
That was fun.
impacted sports
Yeah.
sponsorship pretty heavily. That said, I think, and you'll bear this out, far many more brand sponsors stayed the course with rights holders and teams and leagues and venues, even though the venues were dark, even though games weren't being played. But now that COVID's way in the rearview mirror and we look out over the next 5 to 10 years, I'm really keen to get your perspective on the health of sports sponsorship in the USA Today. I mean, listen, over the next 3.5 to 4 years, we've got World Cup coming in 2026. We've got LA 2028. Two massively large global spectacles where global partners will be all over the place, but there is also always room for local partnerships in LA, at a venue, across 10 or so different World Cup stadiums where activation could occur. I'm really keen to put your crystal ball lens on here. And where do you see sports sponsorship going over the next, we won't go out more than 5 years. And while you're thinking about answering that question, the role that the emerging data platforms driven by AI, measurement metrics, engagement metrics, the advent of social media, and the massive fragmentation of linear media that's taken place over the last 10 to 12 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a 5-hour answer, but I'll try. I think that the sponsorship is alive and well in the United States. And I think that there's so much opportunity for brands who even haven't worked in sports sponsorship to dabble and have some fun and test the waters. So water's warm, brands, come on in. I think that when you look at global properties like the Olympics and FIFA's World Cup, and they have the Club World Cup coming this summer, I think what's so interesting is, listen, the rights holders, those are pretty tight rights. You're not getting a lot of opportunity at the local level. I mean, with Olympics, you could certainly align with some of the wonderful NGBs that are out there. We've had the good fortune of working with the USA Gymnastics organization to help them reinvent and rediscover who they were going to be from a sponsorship offering standpoint post COVID, and USA Lacrosse as well. So there's a lot of ways to do small scale activation around Olympics. And then soccer, there's a lot of different ways to get at World Cup in terms of just partnering with Major League Soccer teams and or individual athletes or retired athletes to create some incredible content. I think one of the things recently, I was talking to Terry Lefton from SBJ, and he said, tell me what you think sponsorship's going. I said, the biggest threat to sponsorship right now is influencers. And brands feeling that they can eliminate a sports or a league deal and just work with a core of influencers to achieve their goals. And I think that there needs to be balance. I don't think it's one or the other. And I think some brands are doing a really good job balancing when influencers make sense. And I'm not talking about signed athletes. I'm talking about non-athletic influencers. And I think there's, every sports sponsorship tends to go in waves where it's really, really hot. And then there'll be like a little bit of a divestiture because people will start to find other ways to reach sports fans. And like you mentioned, that fragmented, all the different ways you can reach sports fans through digital, social, television, radio. I mean, again, the television and radio are now digital, right? So that's another mechanism. It's a very fragmented world. And I think that's where brands really creating and understanding what their objectives are, not their emotions are, and putting that together in a buying strategy and staying focused is really important, because if you get too fragmented across all this communication styles, your message will be completely lost, and you can't be everything to everyone. So I think that it's an exciting time to be in America with World Cup and Olympics coming, and just, understanding that a lot of brands can get involved. They just have to get creative with how they do it so that they're not violating any rights.
Right.
We're rule followers here at POV.
Well,
We're
no, you have to be, but that doesn't mean you can't be creative.
not
In
at
fact,
all.
it requires a deeper, wider, broader level of creativity when you do have to deal with tight rights issues, as you just described. There's, as we said earlier, there's lots of ways to skin this cat, and POV Sports Marketing Molly is skinning a lot of cats in a lot of different ways. So congratulations to you. Listen, we've got just a few minutes left, and we always end each episode with the same 3 questions for our guests, called the hot questions. So here's the first one.
Okay.
This is your favorite mistake. Not that any of us loves admitting that we made mistakes professionally, but we all do. We all learn from them. So what was the favorite one? That's where you kind of really messed up and you learned the most from.
Immediately, I just know exactly what it is. There's 2, but I'll give you one. I was at the Philadelphia Eagles, and our VP had moved on. I was a director at the time, and Mark Donovan, who again, loved working for him. He's now the president of the Kansas City Chiefs, but Mark's gone on to do an amazing job with that organization. But he called me into his office and he said, "Do you want to be considered for the VP job?" And I said to him, "Well, I don't know if all these people will want to report to me. They're my friends." And he said, "Go home and think about it." I said, "Okay." And so the next day I came back and I said, "No, I think we need someone with like tons of experience to come in and lead the group." And they brought a gentleman in, very nice guy. But I realized when they brought this gentleman in that I could have done the job. But it was the little voice on your shoulder of self-doubt. And it was the best thing that could have happened to me, because about a year later, I had an opportunity to go to the WNBA to work for Donna Orender, another amazing boss, and start basically create the national sales organization for the WNBA. The WNBA had always been sold as kind of an add-on to the NBA, and they wanted to have their own sales group. And so they brought me in to build out the sales group and the process. And if that hadn't happened, I would probably have stayed at the Eagles longer. And I ultimately went back to the Eagles organization about 5 or 6 years later, and had another wonderful time there. But I think there's times where we judge ourselves, and it was a real learning for me, and I'm grateful for that, because again, it made me better. And my journey to the NBA and working with people like Adam Silver and Mark Tatum and all the people that I had an opportunity to work with, were just, it was career changing for me and put me on the track to continue growing. And I think that was a real big one for me. So Mark is still one of my favorites, but it was my failure to say, I'm ready. And I think I did have one person come into me about 4 weeks later and said, "Why am I not reporting to you?" And I said, "Because I didn't think you'd want to report to me." And this woman said, "I would have reported to you because I respect you." And I'm like, wow, I'm an idiot. But again, life goes on and you learn. And I think that's a good thing.
Well, yeah, and you're actually dealing with it right now, because you answered a question earlier where you just said, if a brand asks you something and you don't have an immediate answer, or that needs to a 24-hour ingestion period, I'll handle it. We'll handle it. You could have easily said that to Donovan. I'll handle it.
Yeah. I mean, this is also, I think, a thing, and I tell a lot of young women this. Women have a tendency to feel, and again, I'd like to say I'm a lot wiser now. I was 34 years old at the time. And mind you, there were no vice presidents in the National Football League that were women at the time. I was in a room full of guys. And so you already have that little chip on your shoulder of self-doubt that you have to get to work early, stay late, work extra games, travel with the team, do whatever just to keep your head in the game. But women have a tendency to feel like, well, if I'm going to be the CEO, I have to know IT, HR, operations, all the sales, all the production line, everything. And that is not the way men think. I'm a mother of 2 sons, and I can tell you, I confirm it every day. I'll say, "Can you do that?" They're like, "I can totally do that." And then halfway as they're driving out the driveway, about to run over the mailbox, I'm like, "Can you back out of the driveway?" "I thought I could." I'm like, "Okay." And we all kind of laugh. But it is that sense of women have this feeling like, if I'm not an expert at it, I can't do it right away. And I think men are much better at saying, you know what, I will figure it out. I'll surround myself with people and I'll be okay. Women need to embrace those opportunities for leadership and surround themselves with people who will make them successful. It is how I built an agency with
There's
other
the
people.
nugget, folks. That's the mic drop moment right there.
Boom.
Boom. Next question. You're the favorite. Well, this is really all about female singer-songwriters, female artists. So the question is, the favorite live concert that you ever attended where a female artist or a female-led band was the headliner?
Okay. Well, what's funny is you'd think, okay, I've been to tons of concerts, but I literally have not gone to a lot of female singing concerts. I went to a TLC concert and Christina Aguilera opened, and that woman sang At Last by Etta James. And that goosebumps, unbelievable in live concert. And again, I worked at the Palace of Auburn Hills and we had a lot of concerts that came through, but my era was more like Hootie and the Blowfish was cool. And I might've gone to a few Grateful Dead concerts, and it wasn't as much about female performers. I would love to see Lady Gaga in concert. I think she would be tremendous.
She's on my bucket list too. It literally just one of our just recent guests. Episode hasn't even aired yet. Lady Gaga is
on my list.
Yep.
Phenomenal.
All right, here's the last one. This is, I think, the pithy one, and it's really, and we know this, words matter. It's what we say, what we don't say, particularly in a leadership role. You can be as impactful by being silent as you can saying the right thing. So your favorite word and why?
You know, my favorite word is passion, and being passionate about what we do every day, no matter how silly it might be. I think that when I was graduating from college, one of the reasons I ended up in the sports business was Mark McCormick gave the commencement address at my alma mater. And I didn't even know who this guy was, and I had to defend him in front of some people who were going to protest graduation, and so I had to do a lot of research on him. But he ended up giving a commencement speech, and it was all about finding your passion, finding your genius, and understanding that if you are truly passionate about what you're doing, whether that's leading a team or doing the work, you will never work a day in your life. And that still rings true to me, that we get passionate about a successful promotion. We get passionate about a negotiation. We get passionate about KPIs. Carl, you know, I am a total geek when it comes to data points, okay? I'm like, let's let the data guide our decision making. But I get passionate about learning about different markets and understanding what makes a team tick. And being a student of the sports marketing industry is fun. And you have to be passionate about that and passionate about the work you're doing. If you can work side by side with people that feel that way, you truly will never work a day in your life.
Well, your passion has come through over the last 40 plus minutes with all of the answers to all of the questions. And clearly POV Sports Marketing, led by founder and CEO Molly Arbogast, is destined for great things in the future. Cannot thank you enough, Molly, for being a guest today.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate the opportunity.